Good evening. I hope that mass exodus isn't indicative of the reception my talk's going to get tonight. I'm assuming these are all a class requirement. It's really nice to be here, and I want to thank Vicki again for organizing another great conference here on the Clark Fork River. Having worked in the Clark Fork Pend Oreille watershed for the past 15 years, my work has evolved from environmental advocacy organizations like the Clark Fork Coalition, the Cabinet Resource Group, and the Rock Creek Alliance, to more recently work with the consensus-based and collaborative work of the Tri-State Water Quality Council. I note this history because I think there's a fundamental difference in how these groups generally approach natural resource issues, and more importantly, how they seek solutions to these issues. I don't have a PowerPoint presentation or any fancy graphics to show you tonight because I believe building effective partnerships is all about connecting and communicating with people. And that's what I hope to convey this evening as I give you my perceptions about how we have created successful watershed partnerships. But first I'd like to give you a brief background on the Tri-State Council. We're centrally located in the watershed. Don't mean to imply we're the center of the universe, because we are in Idaho, and we do work in the entire Clark Fork Pend Oreille watershed. That involves the Clark Fork River here in Montana, which also flows across the border into Idaho, the Lake Pend Oreille, which is Idaho's largest freshwater lake, and then into the Pend Oreille River, which then crosses the state line into Washington. The Tri-State Council was formed about a dozen years ago after U.S. Congress awarded substantial funding under the 1987 Clean Water Act for water quality studies throughout the basin. The funding resulted from citizen concerns over increasing algae growth in both the Clark Fork River and further downstream in Idaho's Lake Pend Oreille. Under those studies, Regions 8 and 10 of EPA, the states of Idaho, Washington, and Montana, and a number of discharges and other stakeholders in the basin came together, studied the various sections of the basin, and worked to create a management plan that would identify specific objectives and ways to improve the basin's water quality and protect it from further degradation. The conclusion of those studies was that the problem affecting the entire 3 states was nutrient pollution. Other problems like the heavy metals in the upper Clark Fork were noted, but it was also felt that there were other programs that were in place to deal with those problems, and that was not affecting the entire watershed all the way downstream to Washington State. When the studies and management plan were completed, the group of people had formed a great working relationship together over the previous 4 years, kind of stared at each other, and looked at each other and said, well, what do we do now? And at that moment, everyone agreed that it was not going to be another set of studies and plans that sat on a shelf collecting dust. Instead, they wanted to continue their working relationship and actually implement portions of the basin management plan. And that was the shared passion that led to the birth of the Tri-State Water Quality Council. Today, the council is a collaboration of federal, state, and local governments, Native American tribes, businesses, industry, and environmental groups that works by consensus. We became a nonprofit organization 4 years after our formation. From the very beginning, the council's focus was on finding solutions to problems. Again, I believe this is a fundamental difference to how other groups were working in the basin at the time. The traditional paradigm of environmental advocacy organizations, and that's not just in our watershed, but in other watersheds around the country, was to focus on problems rather than solutions. The logical outgrowth of that problem-oriented focus is to posture for control, to define and advocate a very specific position, and to force desired behavior, sometimes through litigation. That isn't to say that litigation doesn't have a role, but all in all, the approach can best be defined as adversarial, and generally includes an outlook that defines collaboration and partnering as a way to end up on the losing side of a negotiation, or to at least have to give something up. While I'm glad to say that attitude has shifted somewhat over the years, especially with the growth of so many watershed groups, there still are some groups who consider collaboration and consensus to be secondary to their work. However, the work to be done must be done for the resource not to protect an organization, not to protect a position, and not to protect a funding source who happens to provide financial support for a particular approach. By partnering with stakeholders, some who could have been potential adversaries, the Tri-State Council has been working behind the scenes to accomplish water quality improvements. We instituted a number of innovative programs by partnering with a host of entities throughout the 3 states, and by always turning first to established organizations within the watershed to partner with. Those folks who know their communities best, who can take our message to their communities. If those organizations didn't exist, we formed our own ad hoc committees or found independent contractors in the community to make those connections, to generate solutions, and to work towards on-the-ground implementation. So central to successful partnering, I believe, are these elements. First, focusing on goals and what you want to be, the outcome to be, by keeping your eye on the prize. Secondly, by having infinite patience and faith that you'll reach that outcome. Thirdly, by building on a foundation of trust and letting solutions come from the bottom up, not by imposing your will down. Fourthly, by finding common ground, a common passion that believes that most people get it and desire and understand the importance of good water quality. And finally, by communicating honestly and respectfully, and most importantly, without a hidden agenda. In short, I believe these elements to be true leadership, and in the end, that always boils down to individuals who possess those leadership traits. The council was very fortunate during this time to have Ruth Watkins as its leader. I know many of you here know Ruth and have worked with her over the years, and I think you'll agree with me that Ruth's unique personality and leadership skills were really a linchpin in the council's many successes. So by searching for solutions with our partners instead of posturing with adversaries, a few of the highlights of our major successes included negotiating and implementing the voluntary nutrient reduction program that you heard about earlier for 200 miles of the Clark Fork River. This involved working with all the major dischargers in the Clark Fork River Basin, including the city of Missoula, and the recent upgrade to the wastewater treatment plant, the biological nutrient removal system, is part of the city's commitment under the VNRP program. Another big program we facilitated was an interstate agreement between the states of Idaho and Montana that set a target for pollutant loading at our shared borders, and that was to protect the open waters of Lake Pend Oreille. Another highlight of our work in working with our partners was coordinating a basin-wide water quality monitoring program that in effect took the place of the 3 individual states monitoring that was going on in the basin. And this allowed us to eliminate duplication of effort, reduce costs, and ensured consistency of methodology and analysis across the 3 states. Finally, what I believe to be the culmination of my earlier points about leadership and successful partnering, I believe is the $1 million grant that we obtained for the Clark Fork Pend Oreille watershed by partnering with the Flathead Basin Commission, the Blackfoot Challenge, and the Watershed Restoration Coalition of the Upper Clark Fork. These were all successful partnerships in their own right, and this was a new partnership for us to reach out and basically form a partnership of partnerships with these other groups. In fact, our grant proposal actually ranked #1 out of nearly 200 competitive applications received nationwide under EPA's inaugural Watershed Initiative program. It was ranked #1, I believe, because of the interstate partnering that was involved in our application and over such a large geographical area. So I think it's interesting to look at the grant and how this partnership came together so quickly and remained successful. Many of the elements I mentioned earlier were present, but it also involved a financial aspect that I think can often be a cause of failure when partnerships and coalitions form. So first and foremost, there needs to be upfront communication and planning. When the council and each of our partners first learned of the grant opportunity, we of course were each planning to submit our own separate proposals. We soon learned that the national competition involved having to be nominated by the governor of the state. So, and each governor could only advance 2 proposals out of his entire state. So after that, it would go to the regional EPA office, and then the regional EPA offices would make a further cut and only advance 2 proposals to the nationwide competition. So there were many opportunities for our proposals to be cut from the program. So early on, we contacted each of the entities that we heard were going to submit proposals and asked if they wanted to talk about joining together and increasing our chances for getting some funding instead of competing against each other. I have to note that all these groups did meet the criteria of the grant, which was to have watershed plans already in place and to have implementation projects ready to go on the ground that just needed funding. So I guess my first point is early planning and communication are essential if you're going to be partnering and working in broader partnerships and coalitions. I guess the next thing that was a little surprising to me was that each of these entities actually responded positively to joining together to do a proposal. After several conference calls, we communicated about the advantages and disadvantages of partnering or going alone, and then we all agreed that we could certainly increase our chances to get some funding for our watershed if we partnered together. I believe that really money isn't the best reason to form partnerships and coalitions. In our case, it was. However, we did see the broader goal and the broader benefit of creating more synergy by partnering with new, existing larger partnerships within the basin. So I guess my second point is that we need to have a vision, to be honest, and to be able to step out of a parochial attitude and reach out and not be afraid to work closely with other people, even when it involves substantial amounts of funding. And again, the tricky part does involve the funding. That's always a very sensitive topic. Folks are, want to be autonomous. There's a lot of competition financially right now among groups. And so there was a little bit of a testy point, I guess, where we were all trying to figure who is going to be the fiscal agent for the grant, who's going to be accountable to EPA for reports, who would do the budgeting, the grant tracking, passing on all the funding to the partnering entities. And once again, I was surprised to learn, maybe a bit naively, that nobody really wanted that job. And in fact, I think that somebody said, that's just a big headache, and no one really wanted to do it. So we were kind of all scratching our heads, and after we talked a while and considering the council's past grant experience with EPA, and I guess our willingness to, maybe not think it was quite such a headache, we agreed that the council would take on that role. So I guess my third point would be to expect the unexpected, and that may not always be a bad thing, and make sure that there's an entity in your partnership or group that has very strong fiscal management abilities. We continued our financial discussions, more in-depth discussions about structuring administrative costs. We agreed on capping our administrative requests within the grant. Again, keeping our eye on the broader outcome that we were after, which was to get money for the basin. So we agreed to a set percentage to cap our administrative work. And then we went further and said, gee, if we actually do get funding, likely we aren't going to get what we asked for. There's probably going to be cuts. So let's talk now about how we're going to cut our projects and what we're going to cut and how we're going to cut this. So we agreed on the front end how we were going to cut our projects. So in our case, we agreed to do it equally across the board. Whatever percentage our grant was cut, we were going to cut equally across the board. I guess then what happened is when we did get the funding, we were really surprised, and our grant did come in less. We were funded less than what we requested. And we started going through our projects and cutting our funds and equally. And there got to be a lot of give and take among the groups. One of the groups said, well, gee, I can probably get away with a little less on this project and that project. So actually, the funding cut didn't end up to be equal among all the groups. There was a lot of give and take that went on. And I guess what that told me was, gee, our partnership is really working here. We haven't even barely started, and we've already got a good rapport and give and take going on. So that trust, I think, had been established pretty well. Finally, I believe that the Blackfoot Challenge, the Council, the Flathead Basin Commission, and the Watershed Restoration Coalition really never had a second thought after we decided to work together in goodwill. None of us ever looked back and ever looked upon this funding as coming to us or for us, but rather coming to and for the watershed. And that, in the end, is what I believe is the true beneficiary of successful partnering. Thank you.
My name is Mark Holston. I'm the Public Information Officer for the Flathead Basin Commission up in Kalispell. We've heard a lot about Flathead County tonight. I live there and I learned some new facts tonight from a couple of excellent presentations. And yes, we seem to be the epicenter of growth, and of course that related to water quality is one of our big issues. Educational outreach has always been one of our priorities because, as we all know, we've talked about $1 billion tonight. More than $1 billion in the Flathead. The Flathead Basin Commission has been dealing in the past couple of years within the neighborhood of over $1 million a year in grants to do watershed restoration work, but it's a drop in the bucket. The Flathead, with Flathead Lake, over 500 other lakes and hundreds of miles of rivers and streams, and quite a few on the impaired water bodies list, many in need of TMDL work, and watershed restoration. We're not going to get there anywhere near our goal in the lifetime of anybody in this room through grants, even if we're talking about tens of millions of dollars. We tend to look at the grant money that we get and the work that we do on the ground as offering a demonstration of techniques, knowing that the incremental improvement to water quality is probably going to be very small. And we have tremendous growth, and most of that growth tends to be focused on streams and lakes, and now even wetlands, and everyone wants to be near water. So we need to engage the public in the broadest way that we possibly can to get each individual citizen to make better land management decisions on their own private property, BMPs. So we're stressing the use of landowner BMPs and trying to use voluntary, non-regulatory, which is a big issue in the Flathead politically. Our climate is not well suited now for taking a heavily regulatory route. We need to engage people as citizens to try to make them recognize that if they use better land management practices on their property, it will protect their property values and enhance their property values and enhance their quality of life because of the amenities that it will encourage and support. So we have produced a little in-house video. We have thousands of copies of this, although we are getting it on our website. We're using a lot of different means of distribution to get this out into the community. I'll be going out and doing little workshops, like having coffees in someone's home. People will come over, we'll show the video, and then use the information in the video as a springboard to get people talking about landowner BMPs. It'll be on our website, it'll be distributed through the Flathead Lakers and other NGOs. And we also have copies at our display over in the poster room, so please pick up a copy. I may not have enough for everybody, but I'll be happy to get you a copy because the information is fairly generic and it may have application in areas where all of you live. And we think that using this relatively low-cost, inexpensive digital television technology to produce DVDs is good, and we're already thinking about doing another version of this focusing on riparian and stream restoration techniques. So this is primarily for people living on lakes. The title is called Healthy Lakes Through Living Shores, and it was produced in-house. I'd be happy to talk to anybody later on in the next day or so about how you do this. I happen to come from a background of 14 years in television and a couple of years of teaching television production. So it was easy for me. May not be easy for everybody, but there are ways that you can accomplish this, and there's probably somebody in your organization that has some expertise in this area. So let's dim the lights and watch the video, and then I'm going to be available later if anybody wants to chat, but we're a little behind schedule. So after the video, and we'll bring the lights back up and move into the final presentation. Thanks very much. Water quality is the job of the Flathead Basin Commission. We invite you to take a few minutes to learn more about what some of your neighbors are doing to protect this important natural asset. and learn about simple steps you can take on your own property to protect and improve water quality. Working together, we can have healthy lakes through living shores. Keeping our lakes, streams, and wetlands healthy takes knowledge and work. On a crisp fall day, local residents interested in learning about how to manage their lakefront property attend a Flathead Basin Commission workshop on Swan Lake. Dr. Paul Hansen, an expert in shoreline management and restoration, helps them understand simple techniques that will protect water quality, improve their property value, and enhance their quality of life.
If I take a cattail marsh, it has one species. If I go out there and disturb it heavily, I now have weeds come in, and now I've got multiple species. I've increased the biodiversity, so therefore that's good, right? No, that's going the wrong way.
On Little Bitterroot Lake, Anna Marie Bailey, a Flathead Basin Commission volunteer monitor, does one of her routine observations, checking for water clarity. Her report is one of thousands that have been done by volunteers on dozens of area lakes in the past decade. In the middle of Whitefish Lake, volunteer monitor Bill Hurst goes through the same procedure, one he's done for many years.
Sampling time is, what time is it?
On Ashley Creek, Flathead Basin Commission volunteer monitors work in the early morning hours to monitor conditions in this important Flathead Valley stream. Nearby on Mount Creek, a team of specialists working for the Flathead Basin Commission restores a badly damaged portion of the small stream using a variety of techniques. Further up Mount Creek, other experts are working on a plan to relocate a portion of the county road, removing a source of tons of sediment that clog the small stream every spring. At the Flathead Lake Biological Station at Yellow Bay, University of Montana researcher Jim Kraft works with Flathead Basin Commission volunteer monitors at an annual training meeting.
Well, the lakes that you guys have all been working on at least has a 10-year data set that we can look at to see what might be going on. There's a lot of lakes where they're going to go out this year.
These volunteers collect data on many lakes where a lack of funding prohibits state, federal, and local agencies from doing such important work. And on the Whitefish River near Evergreen, Helena Flats schoolteacher Randy Jakes uses skill he learned at a Flathead Basin Commission training program to get his 7th grade students into the water for a little monitoring.
Very, very little, skimpy little net. Can't take no 7th grader kicking it out. You're going to be kicking in front of it, digging, swooshing around.
Go like this, right?
All right. So what we're going to do is just get the oxygen that's in the water by using our sample. And our sample jar's got some chemicals left from last year, so we'll wash it out.
The kids will test the river for dissolved oxygen and pH, and will look for aquatic insects. They'll even determine the cubic feet of water flowing by.
No, it's 47.6. It has to be 30 seconds, remember? Yeah, I know. I just don't want my hands to freeze.
That's a little about the Flathead Basin Commission. Now, where do you fit in? Well, if you live on a lake, stream, or wetland, there are simple steps you can take to make sure that what you value most, water quality, wildlife, recreation, great views, and protecting your investment, doesn't wither away with each passing year like a slowly eroding shoreline.
And so what you want to do is have a tangle of vegetation. That's what they keep talking about. It's something we can all understand. A tangle of vegetation that intercepts that, slows that down. Water cannot run across that parking lot with grass growing through it, asphalt with grass. Look at how the water would have to go through behind John there, have to come across that area, slow down, and become part of that sponge, be absorbed by that sponge. And so you would have reduced runoff into the lake, reduced pollution that comes across the doormat of the lake into the lake.
Indeed, vegetation is a fundamental component of a healthy shoreline environment. Some consider it a nuisance and remove it, replacing native plants with lawns and flower gardens. But a more natural setting is a foundation upon which all other desirable aspects of a healthy shoreline are rooted: scenery, fish populations, wildlife, and water quality. They are all linked to a healthy supporting system of plants and trees. Without a healthy shore, these other things will quickly decline or disappear. Terry DeVokie is a Flathead Basin Commission volunteer monitor who lives on Half Moon Lake. She's also a member of the Native Plant Society.
One of the things about native plants is if you want a lot less work and a lot less maintenance in your yard, native plants are the way to go. You don't have nearly the fertilization. I mean, you don't have to do any. And those fertilizers, as you know, can run right off into your lake. And then there goes maybe your water quality. Native vegetation also is great because it needs a lot less watering and sometimes no watering at all. And it's frost resistant. Another thing I think about native plants, Mark, is as our valley grows and expands and gets bigger, we lose more of our native vegetation as we build farther from our towns and our cities. And by keeping your native vegetation, you kind of help retain a bit of that historical flavor of Montana in your yard. And don't we all live here? Because at least partially, Montana is such a beautiful place. And so it seems a shame to move to a beautiful lakeside and then remove the vegetation, which is part of the beauty as to why you came. And the final thing, oh man, once you remove that native vegetation, it is so difficult to get it back, to reestablish it. Once it's removed, it's a wonderful place for weed seeds to fly into. The weeds can outcompete some of our native plants. And native plants are sometimes difficult to get established.
Vegetation can be a powerful tool for preserving the natural quality of shoreland. We encourage the use of what are called best management practices, or BMPs. This is a term you will hear a lot these days as everyone, from industry to individual citizens, learns how simple voluntary methods can produce important benefits. Lakeshore property can be developed, enhanced, or preserved in a way that will encourage positive results, both for the landowner and the environment. All too often, developing lakeshore property has been synonymous with removing virtually all of the natural vegetation. Although clearing shoreland may improve the view, what frequently follows is increased shoreline erosion, an absence of wildlife, and decreasing water quality.
I guess our main concern is the water quality, and we'd like it to stay clean. It's one of the cleanest lakes in this basin, and if anything were to happen, I think it's a 22-year turnover, and that would be devastating. So the water quality is probably our main concern.
Best management practices are something that John O'Kane knows a lot about. He's been using them on his property on Peterson Lake near Big Fork for over 30 years. John is also a Flathead Basin Commission volunteer monitor who keeps an eye on Peterson Lake and nearby Abbott Lake.
These are two logging trails that came down. We use one of them for a foot trail now, and we've let it grow over. It's full of trees now and young pine. This one is kept open. And then down here where the landing was, we've just mowed it and let natural grasses produce what looks like a lawn now. And that way we don't have to fertilize it, we don't have to water it, we don't have to do anything, because whatever comes up naturally just gets mowed down, and it always winds up looking like it should.
What's known as shoreland editing is a simple solution for landowners who want to enjoy the view and still retain most of their native trees and plants. By selectively removing a tree or a limb here and there, a pleasing view and suitable lake access can be created. Remember, in many cases, trees don't block the view, they are the view.
Actually, once the land was cleared for the house, and much to my wife's chagrin, I've left two trees. One comes through the deck, and I can show you that later. The only trees that have been removed are probably one or two in the past 20 years that have died, and that I've just taken them out because I didn't want to have a place for the bugs to start on the fresh trees with. But no, there's been no trees cut, and you'd be quite surprised when you get up there and take a look of just how much the Rockies you can see.
Shoreland editing, maintaining a buffer zone of natural vegetation, And using native plants were all features that Cameron Blake wanted for her family's home on Blanchard Lake near Whitefish.
It was because of the lake book. After reading the lake book, realized it needed the buffer to protect the lake.
The Lake Book is a guide to lake living distributed by the Flathead Basin Commission. By utilizing the ideas in the Lake Book and on this video, Blake and others who live on area lakes can help ensure that what they love most about their lifestyle, as well as protecting water quality, can be achieved.
Before, when we first moved in, it had been completely cut down and all the natives had been cut to the ground, and we let them grow back. And when we decided to add on, we even opted not to put a lawn in front of the lake, but left all the natives in place. In the view, we can still see the lake through the trees, and it screens us somewhat from the public out on the lake, so it works out fine, and we do have the lake view, and we haven't yet, we can selectively thin where we need to get a view corridors going and leave most of the native vegetation in place.
A home on Flathead Lake is our next stop. Dr. Jack Stanford and his wife Bonnie Ellis worked with the Flathead Basin Commission to demonstrate how the concept of a buffer zone works. What you see now used to be a conventional lawn. Today, the grass has been replaced by a natural buffer zone of native plants and grasses. The couple still has a great view of the lake, but they spend a fraction of the time on property maintenance that they used to, when watering, fertilizing, and cutting grass was a priority.
I think the variety of birds and animals that have just flooded into the area. We've had some spotted sandpipers that made a little nest right along the shoreline here. There have been a few squirrels who've kind of taken over the large stumps that are in the yard and use it as their sentry points. And there are just so many birds flying around and eating the snowberries and taking advantage of all these new plants that just weren't here when we had grass and dandelions right down to the lake.
So, a buffer zone of native plants stabilizes the shoreline and discourages erosion. When the vegetation is removed, wave action caused by wind or boating activity can take a heavy toll. When the shoreline is protected by a healthy expanse of native plants and grasses, rain, runoff, and pollutants are absorbed into the ground before they have a chance to reach the lake.
It can be a nice diverse stand of many different species, each one blooming in sequence, and in reality the yard is in bloom all summer, and the animals are coming and going. It's a very different thing than having a green lawn that just about nothing uses except maybe the few deer that come in and graze on it. These buffer strips retain nutrients that would otherwise be going into the lake, and it's a natural stand of vegetation that once you get to know it and understand it, is very personally enjoyable.
And preservation of healthy native plants will help prevent the incursion of such undesirable non-native species as Eurasian milfoil. Shores alive with intact communities of native plants protect property values, provide a home for wildlife species, and minimize water pollution. Remember, these simple techniques generally apply to lakes, streams, and wetlands. Those who purchase lakefront property that has been poorly managed by previous owners are encouraged to take steps to restore the property to a more natural condition. Local landscape architects and nurseries specializing in such design work and native plant stock can be of great assistance. The Flathead Basin Commission can put you in touch with local firms who can provide expert advice and services. Now, let's summarize some of the key points we've covered. And remember that even in the kind of increasingly urbanized settings that are popping up on many of the Flathead's most popular and accessible lakes, important steps can be taken that will reduce water pollution. Cut back on mowing and lawn fertilizing in areas immediately adjacent to the shore. That will help reduce runoff pollution that can dramatically worsen water quality. And it will save precious time and money. Remember that even a buffer zone of just 5 to 10 feet will help keep harmful pollutants out of the lake. It's up to you, a decision each landowner has to make on their own, based on their property and personal needs. Consider using wildflowers and other kinds of natural vegetation rather than non-native flowers and shrubs. Think about living in the landscape, not changing it too much or dominating it. And remember, there is no lakeshore property that can't be improved by planting native species and encouraging vegetative growth to protect water quality. If each of us does our small part, the benefit to the entire Flathead can be enormous. Let's work together to ensure that our most precious natural asset, our pristine lakes, streams, and wetlands, remain healthy for generations to come. By maintaining healthy lakes through living shores, we can achieve that goal.
My name is Kathy Coleman with the Natural Resource Damage Program, and I'm going to showcase an educational CD that the Natural Resource Damage Program created. The cleanup of Silverbow Creek Superfund site near Butte is the largest stream and floodplain remediation and restoration project ever undertaken in the United States. Since remediation began in 1999, DEQ has removed over 1 million cubic yards of tailings in the floodplain and reconstructed a portion of the stream. When complete, over 22 miles of the stream channel and floodplain will have been removed or will have been treated to remove some 4 million cubic yards of tailings and metals laden soils. Under restoration, a greenway trail will be constructed to enhance aquatic and riparian resources as well as provide recreational opportunities. This educational CD provides a visual context to comprehend the enormous size of this pollution problem, cleanup, remediation, and restoration. Artist Todd Trigstead spent 10 years filming cultural and environmental impacts of Butte's copper mining industry. Some of his work is showcased on this CD as well as new additional work. The CD offers photos, panoramic views, videos, and diagrams to cover such topics as mining history, environmental injuries, remediation, and restoration. I'm not going to go through the whole CD, but just highlight a few portions. And we will have these CDs available at the poster session tomorrow.
Next, probably week to 10 days, we'll have copies. You can see Chris or you can see me and give us your card and we'll be happy to send you a copy.
And there will also be an HTML version or website version available too.
We have sound.
One thing that struck me about this area is the absence of small birds. By that I mean songbirds of different kinds. There's a few that you'll see around here, not very darn many of them. You'll see ravens and sparrows and the pigeons, and that's basically what you see them most of the time. And I think that's another thing that's probably connected to all the mining, that went on. You don't think about the birds that much. They destroyed their habitat. Well, just think of the name of it. Silverbow Creek. Somebody recognized the beauty of the stream when they originally saw it and named it that. It's a striking name. And it was a place that, as I say, was probably teeming with wildlife and native trout. There's probably no one alive now that saw it in its original state. because they started mining here such a long time ago. There's a few people in Deer Lodge Valley over 100 years old. I don't even know if that's going back far enough to, to get an idea of what the original, but wherever you had those big flats along the river, your riverine forest, and that's almost all gone. Once in a while you'll see a big old willow or cottonwood, on somebody's place, but over the course of time they've mowed them down. When the trappers got here, which was before the miners, there was beaver all over the place. So these little streams were backed up, in a lot of beaver ponds. And probably wildlife to an incredible degree all over this valley. Everything from antelope to moose, deer, elk, right here in the Silverbow Valley.
The next section is the industrial history section, and I'm just going to give you an example of the different panoramics that we have on the CD. This one shows the Butte area before and present day. And you can zoom in and zoom out and get a real perspective of the whole area of what it was then and what it is now. I'm going to quickly go into the environmental injuries section.
I'm Carol Fox. I'm the Restoration Program Chief with the Montana Natural Resource Damage Program at the Department of Justice. And I, along with a team of others, are administering the funds that are used for the restoration of natural resources in the Upper Clark Fork River Basin. And these funds came from a lawsuit that the state filed in 1983. That lawsuit was filed for just what you see here, hazardous substance contamination to the natural resources in the basin. And we categorize these natural resources injuries. There were aquatic injuries, water quality, sediments contaminated with metals, fisheries losses, and aquatic insects that were impacted. Those were the aquatic injuries. For the terrestrial injuries, you see in a floodplain here, soils highly contaminated with metals that can't support vegetation, and because they can't support vegetation, they no longer provide wildlife habitat. They don't support wildlife populations. So that's an example of our terrestrial injuries. The other injuries that we sued about were the groundwater injuries. You can't see those, but what we're talking about is the water that all of us use for irrigation, for drinking water. And in the Butte, Anaconda, Milltown, and Rocker areas, we had very pervasive contamination to groundwater from those hazardous substances. And so that was our third injury covered in the lawsuit.
I'm going to skip to remediation section.
Hi, my name's Joel Chavez, and I work for the Department of Environmental Quality. And I've managed the design and construction for the Streamside Tailings Operable Unit, which is about 22 miles of stream and floodplain on Silverbow Creek that runs from Butte down to Warm Springs Ponds. The entire area has been heavily impacted by past mining practices, historic mining practices. So the entire stream and floodplain is heavily contaminated with mill tailings, leftovers from when they were concentrating ore, and slag from past smelting processes. The material is full of heavy metals, and it's toxic to aquatic and human life, so that's what we're doing, is clean this mess up. It's part of a settlement with Atlantic Richfield Corporation, which bought the Anaconda Copper Mining Company some years ago. It's a Superfund site, and they settled with the state, the United States, and the Confederate Kootenai and Salish tribe on this. So the state, or the DEQ rather, got $80 million in associated interest from ARCO to implement the remedial activity here. And that's what we're doing, is the remedial action, which is cleaning it up so it's no longer toxic to human or other life forms.
That's behind me. What we're doing is excavating the tailings next to the existing creek. And the person standing there is checking the grade with a laser level to make sure that the excavator reaches the bottom of the tailings, as was determined by the sampling that was done previously. We're checking that grade at the 50-foot intervals on a 50-foot grid pattern. We're able to maintain that even depth and assure that we're getting all of the tailings out. After the tailings are excavated in here, we will be backfilling again on the same 50-foot grid pattern, and that person will also be checking grade at that time to assure that we're getting it back up to the final level that we want it.
I'm Charlie Coleman. I'm a project manager for the Environmental Protection Agency. I'm project manager for the Anaconda Superfund site here in Anaconda. The Silverbow Creek materials in particular are brought in on this rail spur to an unloading facility in this location right here. Once unloaded, they're put on truck and brought over to various locations in the B2 cell. Initially, waste were deposited on the east end of the B2. It was a low spot. It was brought in here first to help promote better drainage of the B2 cell. As the waste volumes continued, which are up to approximately 500,000 cubic yards, the material was further deposited to the west. Once it was deposited, these materials were graded. Tailings materials that have been deposited here at the Opportunity Ponds stretch from the smelter, which is directly behind me in the foreground of the Pintler Mountains there, for about 7 miles to the northeast to almost the Warm Springs Ponds. We're approximately a third of the way into the Opportunity Ponds, which encompasses over 3,500 acres. The ponds themselves is made up of several cells, the A, B, C, and D cells, and they contain over 250 million cubic yards of tailings material. Right here we're standing on the Opportunity Ponds, more specifically on the west edge of the B2 cell of the Opportunity Ponds, which is our designated waste consolidation area. This area receives waste materials from other sites within the Anaconda site as well as the Clark Fork Basin, including materials that are currently being deposited here from the Silverbow Creek cleanup. The waste repository has been in operation for about 5 years. To date, approximately 500,000 cubic yards of waste materials have been disposed of in the B2 cell. You can see directly behind me, the vegetated area is the footprint itself. And to my other side here, these are waste materials actually from Silverbow Creek. They've been placed on top of the footprint and have been graded. Once all the consolidation and remediation efforts have been completed, this entire B2 cell, as well as the rest of the Opportunity Ponds, will be reclaimed either using a soil cover or treating the materials using in situ treatment, which is a adding of lime materials to neutralize the tailings and the acidity to reduce phytotoxicity, and adding amendments such as organic matter to create a growth medium for vegetation.
Now I'm going to move on to restoration.
Hi, I'm Greg Mullen with the Natural Resource Standards Program. We're in a very unique area of Ramsey Flats on mile 7 of Silverbow Creek. Ramsey Flats, by the way, is a 160-acre area that extends throughout here to both sides of us. And we're kind of in the middle of it, right where Civil Creek comes through the tailings area. A few things I'd like to talk about here. I've been working on this creek for almost 10 years now, and it's exciting because next year the heavy equipment will be coming through here, and these tailings will be removed. This creek will go from a straight shot dead system to a sinuosity stream, with aquatic life and terrestrial life brought back to the system.
Here we are at the bottom of sub-area 2. This area all around me is going to be revegetated in the coming 2 weeks. It looks pretty uniform, but there are several different hydrologic zones here. Of course, we have the stream banks, which have seeded in with mainly weedy species on their own. Typically, it's moist near them and gets drier as you move farther away from them, although there are exceptions. This is borrow material. This is the basis for revegetation here. This is volcanic in this case. It's not soil, it's just dirt. It's never supported plants. That means you would be initiating primary succession. And we could probably satisfy some or most, maybe even all the requirements of remedial revegetation, but not do the kind of job that we'd like to do for restoration. So we mix in this compost, this organic matter. It has nutrients, it has a carbon source, it has soil microbes in it, and this greatly advances us. So we're advancing in the direction of better revegetation and a more baseline type condition. You can see in the background over there the stockpiles of compost that are being used for this. That's provided by the NRD program through Greenway.
In the Butte area, we mostly have... The before image that you're looking at right now showed this place before and during when we were under construction here. And I think it's readily apparent how absolutely desolate this area was. And just look at it now. It's just incredibly lush, incredibly healthy. And this is, again, an example of what we can accomplish and what nature will accomplish on its own once we've taken the poison out of here. And you can really see this land come back to life.
This is the master plan for the Silverboat Creek Greenway, and this was completed in 1995. And the Silverboat Creek Greenway is comprised of that 26-mile corridor that is also coincidental to the Streamside Tailings Operable Unit. So it starts just west of Butte here, follows the creek corridor through Durant Canyon in this area, and then through the Opportunity area closer to Anaconda, and eventually ends close to the Warm Springs ponds. As an outdoor classroom, its restored state is going to have a lot to reveal about habitats and little ecosystems and aquatic habitats and terrestrial habitats. We know as we've moved along, and we deal with this corridor in mile increments, and we look at this corridor and we've applied monies at different levels, you know, in different miles. And we learn every time a new design is started for the next mile. And so it's been really amazing that we learn from every mile and apply that knowledge to the next design. So that in and of itself is just for any project of this magnitude, or anything smaller than this project, we're just gaining a whole lot of knowledge about how streams work and ecosystems work and habitats work. And it's forging new ground in terms of its size and scope and scale. It's forging new ground in terms of the partnerships it's created. You know, finally, remedy and restoration are working hand in hand together at the same time. Remedy's being complemented by restoration, and there's just an amazing cooperation that's creating this landscape that ultimately people may just enjoy it for the sheer fact that there's a fish in the stream. I mean, that might be all that matters, but you know, it's a lot. It can be as deep and as broad and as technical as people want it to be. It can be just as simple as sitting next to a creek and watching the water roll over a rock. I mean, it could be as simple as that.
The last thing I wanted to touch on with the CD, there's a lot of interactive parts with it, but I wanted to show this part. This is a map of all the NRD projects that have been funded to date since 2000. So I can just talk, I'm almost done. So. And all you need to do on this part is just click on a particular project and you get a view of the project and a description. And like I said, I've only touched the surface of the CD. It has lots of interactive parts, lots of photos, lots of panoramics, and lots of details involved. But due to time, I just wanted to touch on a little bit tonight. And again, we do have these CDs available if anybody's interested in a copy. Thank you.
We have kept you a little longer than we promised. It's 9:15, so we'll take just a couple questions.